question is that new clause 11 be read a second time. Mr. Mark Reckless.
Thank you, Chairman. The Honourable Member for Wellingborough has performed a very significant service to the House today, because I believe this is the first time since the 1970s that we have had a discussion in this House as to whether the British people should be allowed to decide how they are governed. Now, I believe that we should be an independent country, trading with Europe, but governing ourselves. But more than that, I believe it is up to the British people to decide how they are governed. Do they prefer to be governed and have their laws made by this House, such that they can throw out the people if they don't like how those laws are made? Or do they prefer to be governed by a qualified majority, including 26 other countries, and have them decide their laws for them and pay 10 billion a year for the privilege? That is the question. It's subject to conditions in this amendment, but for the first time since the 1970s, that issue of principle is here and before us for debate this evening. Here, here. Now, we've heard through this committee debate, and it was, I think, put very, very well by the Honourable Member for Grantham and Stamford, who was saying that for a very long time, I think he said since perhaps the late 80s, the British people had had a settled view about the European Union. They thought this far, but no further. Yet there is a logical inconsistency in that position, because it was in the late 80s that we had the Single European Act, and then the Maastricht Treaty, and then the Treaty of Amsterdam, and then the Treaty of Nice, and then the proposed European Constitution that they then re-described as the Treaty of Lisbon. And each and every one of those treaties has given more and more power to the EU. And I think it is true that by the time of the late 80s, early 90s, there was the settled view of the British people that we had gone quite far enough and they did not want to go any further. Yet they keep on being dragged further and further and further. And I believe that one of the reasons why we see this growing detachment between the people and politicians, of which I would say expenses were a mere symptom, is because year after year after year, the British people hear their politicians, and particularly those on this side of the House, telling them that they're Eurosceptics, putting a position that, oh, well, we don't support all these transfers of power to Europe, we want to get power back, we want more power here in Britain, telling people that we can be in Europe but not run by Europe, suggesting that it is somehow possible and Europe is coming our way and the British agenda is winning and that there is this compromise. Yet the truth is, the only choice that we have in this House and in this country is, do we want to be part of what is happening or do we not? And this clause gives us a chance to vote on that, subject to conditions as to where we should be. Now, many members of this House on this side describe themselves as Eurosceptics. Indeed, I remember the Right Honourable Member for Aylesbury, who I first met in October 1992 at a dinner in Southampton University, I believe at the invitation of the Honourable Member for Bournemouth. And the Right Honourable Member for Aylesbury was sat between myself and another sort of a friend over the water, I shall describe him, who believes so strongly in the European issue and that we should have the choice to decide, that he wants to abolish the Parliament that pays his own salary. And that evening, the Minister sat between myself and Mr. Hannan, and we spoke about the Danish no vote. And we spoke about a motion that was before the House of Commons, calling for a fresh start in Europe. And I'm pleased to say that following that conversation, the following day, the Right Honourable Member for Aylesbury, who I congratulate on his position as Minister for Europe, signed that motion, calling for a fresh start in Europe. And 18, 19 years on, our constituents say, where is that fresh start in Europe? They want to decide how it is that we're governed as a country, and it is surely their right to do so. I will.
Well, Member for Giving Way. The people of the United Kingdom are well renowned for the freedom of speech and for liberty. And would the member not agree that the referendum would be the very method to express themselves more adequately and correctly, and to give all the United Kingdom that opportunity to do so, and that thereby will be the marker for the people of this House.
Yes, indeed. I support giving a referendum to the whole people of the United Kingdom, and that is how we should decide our future. I could not agree more. And it is that principle that means I support this new clause 11 this evening. But there is also a political issue at stake here. And we have heard some description of the Liberal Democrat Party and the in or out referendum that they demanded. And I believe they felt so strongly about it that it was the Right Honourable Member for Kingston Surbiton, who I think was suspended from the House for a day because he felt so strongly we should have an opportunity to vote on an in or out referendum. And as far as I can see, that is the Liberal Democrat position. We had a position that the Lisbon Treaty should have gone to a referendum, and when that treaty was pushed through and we were not allowed that referendum, we then had to consider what our position should be. And it is true. I will.
I'm grateful to my friend for giving way, and as somebody who took part in the Lisbon Treaty debates, I'm slightly surprised to hear the position of the Liberal Democrats now, who have a very honourable position on Europe as being in favour of Europe, and I completely accept that, but their position now is that they would like a referendum if there's a substantial transfer of power to Europe, because when that was taking place in the Treaty of Lisbon, they wanted an in-out referendum, but they voted in favour of the Treaty of Lisbon.
My honourable friend is quite correct, but the point I think that's key here is we can still have the referendum that the Liberal Democrats want. We have the issue on our side of the House that we can't go back to the pre-Lisbon EU because the founding treaties have changed. Yet their position of Lisbon and in the EU, or out, is still a choice before us, and I would hope that the Honourable Member for Cheltenham would still support having that. I give way.
There's clearly no surprise that the Liberal Democrats voted for the Lisbon Treaty Bill because we were in favour of the Lisbon Treaty. But is the Honourable Gentleman arguing against the whole logic of the rest of this bill? Because you can be in favour of a referendum on in-out when a transfer of power happens, or, as in this bill, you can be in favour of specific votes, specific referendums on that transfer of power. But there is absolutely no logic to this suggestion that you should establish, for instance, that a transfer of power has been defeated in a referendum, and then go on to a referendum on in-out, even though no transfer of power is actually taking place.
I'm saying that what's important is the principle of having an in-out referendum. And the Liberal Democrat position, as I understand it, is that the British people should decide whether we stay in the EU with Lisbon or whether we leave. Let's have that referendum. In terms of this bill, I think the most important point is ministers don't seem to have noticed that the world has moved on. A bill that would have been perfectly satisfactory in 1992 at the time of Maastricht is now 19 years of transfer of power further on to the EU, utterly inadequate for its task. And my constituents, aren't especially concerned about, what may or may not happen in terms of what referendum there might be on what sort of technical transfer 5 or 6 years at the earliest down the road. What they want is to vote on our membership of the EU and to do that now. And I fear that the ministers have made a very serious mistake in thinking that having this bill is somehow going to sort of buy off dissent, or somehow my constituents are going to think this is something good that really changes the situation on the EU. My constituents think that the transfer of powers to the EU has already gone far too far. And the only thing that can deal with that situation is an in or out vote so that we can re-establish our independence as a nation. But what I'm more surprised about is the political error that ministers make in thinking this is sufficient. Because they do not consider what they are leaving themselves open for if the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North flips on this issue, as I believe he may. We have heard the debate about the Liberal Democrats, but the assumption on this side of the House that the Labour Party are pro-European and we will always be on the popular side of the argument relative to them is one that I do not think we can simply assume will remain the case. Because, we see very few honourable and right honourable members opposite. But the real thing that defines the Labour Party with respect to Europe is not being pro-European, but actually not feeling that strongly about Europe relative to other issues. Now, my friend over the water I was describing before says there is a first rule of politics, that essentially all parties in government are pro-European, and it is only opposition parties that become genuinely Eurosceptic. And I say to ministers on the Treasury bench, what is going to happen if 2-3 years further on, the Honourable Member for Doncaster North does do that flip and does say that, well, we in the Labour Party, we're pro-European and we want to put the case for that, but it is for the British people to decide. Has he not considered that point and where it will leave our party if that comes to pass? Will he not consider the principle of an in or out referendum is one that is now overpowering and allow the British people their choice?
Well said.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. This clause is extremely interesting.